Welcome to Dedicated. I'm your host, Doug Brunt. Today we're with Jim Rutenberg. Jim is writer-at-large for the New York Times and New York Times Magazine. Over the course of his career, he's covered 7 presidential campaigns. He was part of a team win of the Pulitzer Prize for Public Service in 2018. And he's done in-depth reporting on a range of topics, including the dynastic succession of the Murdoch family, and a very thoughtful piece on the landscape, the media landscape changing of the big 3 anchors, the demise of the big 3 anchors. In the course of his career, he's written more than 2,000 articles. Jim, it's great to have you here. Welcome.
Thanks for having me. It's great.
And on top of all that, Jim is actually a great guy. We've been friends for many years. And
yeah, a while now.
Yeah, I have lots of questions, but I'm excited to hear all there's lots of things I still don't know about you. I'm excited to find out
All right,
about.
we could get into the real thing. Yeah, it's always very phony. No, just kidding. It's not.
And we're going to, there's no booze today, we'll get into it. But, we're going to have mango.
Mango spritzer.
A mango spritzer.
Diet Coke back.
With a Diet Coke back. That's like your rocket fuel for the day. Mm-hmm. All right. And you did a BYO of the mango, which I appreciate.
I did. Naked brand. Are we allowed to say that?
You can say whatever you want here. We can do a lot more than...
It's not sponsored by Naked Brand. But are you open to new sponsorships?
I am looking for a sponsor. I keep talking about when people have a Manhattan or something. I am a big fan of the Luxardo cherry. And so I tout the Luxardo cherry endlessly. And then I always try and get in some remark, and I'm hoping somebody in their marketing department is listening who's going to come be our show sponsor.
Or Get the City. I hear Mayor Adams is looking for things to sponsor.
We're going to get into local politics and media. By the way, what do you do, like 1-to-1 on this? Or?
Yeah, no, a little more. You don't want the mango to be too strong. You want the club soda to be stronger.
Okay.
I'll see you get more out of that. Yeah.
All right. There we go.
Yeah.
All right, my man.
All right.
Great to see you.
Good to see you. Thanks for having me. Cheers.
Cheers.
Nice plink.
Well, you know what? Why don't we do like one turn on that?
Yeah, that's a good idea. And I'll mix it up too.
Yeah,
I got it. Yeah.
Right. I don't hand my cocktail shaker to just anyone.
No, I was a bartender for many years. So
that's right. You and I both have that in our background.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Speaking of background, so I consider you sort of an old school newsman, respect for the trade, and you've been in news your entire career, right out of college.
Yes.
You are what they call in the biz a gossip stringer.
I was
for the Daily News.
Daily News and the New York Post.
And the Post, right out of college for both? Well, I guess you're freelancing.
I didn't graduate college. So, I tried. My family ran out of money, so I actually finished all the credits. But NYU.
That's very tasty, the mango
delicious,
spritzer.
right?
All right, yeah.
A little pep in your step.
And I won't be slurring by the end of the interview.
You can just work on that later. No, I couldn't graduate college. I ran out of money. My family kind of hit the financial skids. So I finished all my credits, but couldn't finish. And I was working in a bar downtown, 55 Bar on Christopher Street. And it was next door to a place called the Lion's Head. And that was the hangout for people at the New York Post, people at the Newsday and the Daily News. And at the end of the night, they would get so ugly drunk, they would get kicked out of their bar and they come into my bar.
Were you bartending or bar back?
I was a floor guy, but I was like making drink. I'd make my own drinks and work the floor. So I was bartending, but kind of hustling onto the floor. And when they would come in, then I would guard the door till 6 a.m. while I can't attest to what was happening behind my back, but they kept the bar open.
By the way, only in New York, or are you hanging out in bars till 6 a.m.?
It was, and then waking up, and then I started. Those guys sent me. Because I had no college degree, I couldn't go to journalism school. They said, go get clipped somewhere because I wanted to be a newspaper reporter. Because to me, it's like, look at these guys. They party till 6 a.m. and then they're writing these cool columns. And what a great life. Mm-hmm. I'm at the time young enough to be stupid thinking that's the way the world. And they were the last of their breed. But they sent me to the free papers, Manhattan Spirit and Our Town, these kind of local papers. I got my clips there, and then I got hired by the Post. And right before we went on strike in 1993, I was on page 6 running gossip.
Gossip for the Post.
Gossip for the Post.
Wow.
Yeah, it was terrible gossip scribe.
That's, I feel like there's some new book coming out about the history of the Post. Have you heard about this?
It's fantastic. Yeah, I'm in that.
Okay, okay, great, because you were in that era.
By Frank DiGiacomo and cast of a couple others. It's a great oral history about the Post.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
I think that's at SNS. My editor was just talking about that book.
It's really fun. It's really fun. I'm a little potty mouthed in my commentary.
So I'll have to look you up in that book. So you're there so really that's like the heyday of these papers too, 90s, and then
it was a full on newspaper war. But
what is a gossip stringer, by the way? That just means freelance, basically. Right?
Well, actually, I want to amend that. I was at the Post. I'm full staff at the Post. And I was a general assignment guy, and Flo Anthony was one of the big people on Page Six, and she went out on leave for a bit, so I was filling in for her. And so I wasn't a main person on Page Six. And I was sent out to parties. I was ripping stuff off that the tips would come into Page Six on a fax machine, just one after another.
And would you have to run out in response to these tips, like so and so's down at
Sometimes you do that.
Studio 54.
Yeah, sometimes you do that. Sometimes Trump would call. He used Page Six because remember, social media obviously didn't exist, but for Trump, he was working in a social media sort of headspace where he just wanted to constantly fill the airtime or the print time with stuff. So when he didn't have a big story to offer the Post, he always had a little stuff.
That's amazing. He was a genius in this like media space of like promotion, even in the 90s. And was Page Six the same format then? So if you were writing something for Page Six, you had like 50 words or something to say, so-and-so is here and this is what we saw.
Yes. But what happened to me was, I was terrible at the guy. I would mix up celebrities. I'd have to bring friends with me to parties. I was like a street urchin, like political reporter kind of already. I covered local politics for those free papers. So then Rupert Murdoch is buying the paper and the paper goes on strike against him.
That's still like early mid-90s?
This is 1993.
Yeah.
And we all lose our jobs. Because we went on strike, the paper was in bankruptcy. It was a really dumb strike, and we just all got fired. And so then it's a longer story I won't go into, but I joined the union the day of the strike. It's the first day I'm eligible.
No way.
And I hand the union guy, I guess I'm telling the story, I hand the union guy the $5 initiation fee, and we're walking out, and I get cold feet, and I say, you know what? No, sorry, I hand him the card, and I said, I don't have the $5. I don't have the $5. I can't join the union. And he says, I'll spot you. So then the strike ends and the bosses call and they're like, okay, come on back in. I'm like, okay, great. I'm broke. I'm broke. By the way, I should add, I'm broke.
You actually didn't have $5.
I had to probably sweat the $5. Well, working at the Post was the first time I was making a little money, but I mean, I had no bank account. I didn't know a refrigerator. So I'm waiting for that call. I get to go, come on back in. And then the editor asked me, you're not in the union, are you? And I was like, it's funny you ask. I don't think so. I didn't pay them the $5. Well, it turned out I was in the union. So then I was a gossip stringer at the Daily News and kind of worked my way from the news to the New York Observer to the New York Times. Long way of telling the story.
So let's see, Observer, and then 2000 is the year you wind up. So you're a few years at the New York Observer doing basically local politics, some media, stuff like that.
It was, so at the end of my time at the Daily News, I was a subway reporter. And my job was just to beat the shit out of the subway system. Just find its flaws and pound it, which was a great daily.
MTA must have loved you. God.
Actually, we ended up having a good relationship, but I can't repeat what the spokesman said for mixed company, and especially in this day and age. But it was basically like, I'll do the rated PG version from the subway guy.
You can go R.
They knew, I guess let me figure out as the words come out of my mouth which way I'm going to go with this story, which is how I write. That's why I need an editor. Yeah. Anyway, so the role of the Daily News was to beat the shit out of them. That was just our job. They knew that. We knew that. So when I started on the beat, the head of the MTA brings me into his office and he says, what's the best way to put this? If you're going to punch me, wasn't punch. If you're going to punch me, kiss me first. So we had an okay relationship, but then the Observer, I was trying to get to the New York Times, and the Times was never going to hire me with these tabloid clips back in that day.
Yeah.
Apparently it said on my resume, do not hire. So the New York Observer, one of my editors went to the New York Observer, which was a writer's paper. So there you could show you could write. So the Observer hired me to cover media as if it was a subway system. So I went over to the New York Observer, covered media as if it was a subway system.
Just beating up the media.
Well, just being like all over them, right? And then the Times came and asked me if I would work for them, but
That's right. And so your job at the Times was media and politics, basically, when you started there in 2000?
Yeah. What actually, believe it or not, was really the television industry and news. And then that led to politics because it was just then that news and politics were really starting to merge with the advent of Fox News. And
Yeah. So let's talk about that thing. So one of your early, I don't know how early really. I mean, I guess you were just talking off cam here about your early meetings with Roger Ailes at Fox News, which is one block from where we are now. And in addition to that, you really did an in-depth piece on the Murdochs. And can you take us through that, sourcing? And because I remember reading a lot of your writing here, and you had such detail. I mean, these were like mini novels. And you must have been consulted by the show Succession, which has a lot to do with the Murdochs, or they, I'm sure, read your writing and were able to pull from that.
Those Succession guys have their own sources, I'm convinced.
Within the family.
Somewhere. I don't know if it's in the family or people who know that. They just seem to know stuff. But I was covering Rupert and Fox from very early in my career. Funny thing was when I was at the Post, I didn't really understand. I was a kid, I was a street reporter first and foremost. So I don't know who Rupert Murdoch is. I don't know this political thing's like not what it is today. And you're just covering, to me, beating up the subways was just like what you do. So when I first meet Roger Ailes, I'm actually working at the Observer at that point, and the Observer, one of my last.
This is late 90s.
This is late 90s, and
Fox, just so the audience knows, Fox was founded in 96.
96.
So they're early days. They're not yet number one, although they're close to getting there, I guess, by that point.
They're getting close, but they're sort of really dying to beat CNN, and they're in a dogfight with MSNBC. And one of the last things I did at the Observer was the turn of the year. All the reporters spent a week with a notable New Yorker who's going to matter in the next millennium. And my assignment was Roger Ailes. And I spent a week in his office. And so to him, I'm beating up on big government, right? But I'm like, I don't know. I'm just like covering the subway system, like that's how. But from all that time, obviously I start covering the Murdochs and Ailes because they're changing the world in real time. And so sources kind of build. It's been, 25 years now.
Yeah. Gabe Sherman is another one. This was sort of fast forwarding a decade plus when he was doing a lot of reporting on it. He definitely had a source in the family. I remember reading some of his stuff and I was thinking it's either James or Liz or James's wife, but he seemed to have someone in the family feeding him stuff. Do you remember all that stuff he kept putting out?
I do remember that. And Michael Wolff, of course, did a big book.
So how does it work? Is you're working sources and then you write a piece and then you have to go back and would you call Rupert or Roger and say, well, here's the piece. We need to fact check some things, or that, you have to go for comment before you run a piece? I
mean, there are source issues I can't really get into, though I will always say that anytime Rupert Murdoch wants to hang out, I'm here.
Yeah.
Just, give me a ring. I'll come over.
How about asking for comment when you would call?
We always ask for comment. And we have, especially with Fox, over many years, we're known quantities with each other. So and at the Times, we take very seriously making sure that everyone understands what we're writing. We want to make sure we're right, obviously. So we always go for comment to the main people. And sometimes they engage, sometimes they don't. But I find it's been a very good professional, relationship. Yeah. There's up there.
Well, and ongoing. I mean, I remember Rupert fell on his yacht, and it must have been pre-COVID, I think. And everyone's thinking, well, we're circling the wagons, this might be the end. And the sons flew out, and here he is. He might have another couple marriages left in him, all this time later. He keeps on going.
He may, right? He just got remarried not that long ago, 93, I believe. And he's formally retired, but, he's always said, he used to really talk to the press a lot more decades ago. And so when he was in that mode, he would say, they're going to have to take me out feet first. He's never really wanted to.
So are you still, I know you're working on a book, which has you really busy right now. We'll get to that in a bit, but are you still, the Murdoch story is ongoing. I think the show Succession might have another season coming, or is that?
They're done, but they, the story never ends. It's this incredibly, I'm not full-time media, but I cover a lot of media. And that's the Murdochs. It's one of those stories I always end up back on because they keep making news and they keep being incredibly interesting. And they are consequential. It is a consequential family. Rupert Murdoch's one of the most consequential figures in my lifetime.
The actual succession has not yet happened. It still seems somewhat up in the air. I every once in a while I'll get wind of some new rumor that actually it might be like James could swoop in the last minute, or there could be some other. I mean, the show does not overly dramatize what I think happens in real life there.
It kind of really doesn't. I mean, some of it. I mean,
in terms of some of it's overly, but in terms of the sort of I don't know the unknown of where this is all going to land.
Yeah, I mean, there's been we've covered this, the trial in Reno, or I don't know if it was quite a trial, but there's a probate sort of hearing, a series of hearings. I was there in Reno in September, just helping decide how the Murdoch Trust is going to be structured, and that could very much affect who the ultimate successor is, though Rupert has made it very clear in his mind and his company, but there are certain promises, or I guess contracts he made, that are being just kind of hashed out now in this court in Nevada. But Rupert has made it clear that Lachlan's the guy he wants to have succeed him, and is the one he's put in place. There's this court battle playing out in Nevada, in Reno. Not a bad, actually great town. I want to put a shout out in for Reno because I was covering another story there. Yeah, he's covered a political story that overlapped with that trial. So very, very nice town. Yeah, a lot of cool things happening there.
Let's talk for a minute. There's a good spot for discussing your writing process. And let's first talk about your more regular pieces, and then the book, which I know has become a big leviathan for you. But how
many authors come on, and when you say it, they go,
more than you would think.
Yeah,
many.
Right.
Yeah, it's a mountain to climb for sure. But on your pieces, so when you and I are sometimes texting about getting together for a drink, what I'll see often is I'm crashing on a piece until next Thursday, anytime after that.
Right.
So can you take us through the life cycle of a piece from conception and your first conversations with an editor to completion?
I'll say maybe the best example to use was I was covering election years are different, by the way. Like I've had very few days off, including weekends, period, over the last year. It was just a crazy election year. But it depends on the piece. If it's a breaking news story, that can take a couple of hours. And usually those are the easiest to write, and they're the cleanest, and they read the best, because the less I know, the better I write. You know what I mean?
Yeah, right.
The more I report. But my big end of the year piece was about these sort of the election denial movement in Nevada and Georgia. And where else? It swung into Pennsylvania a little bit. It was sort of like 4 or 5 states. Now,
so if you have a piece that has research and travel required, do you have to agree a budget up front for things, or you just
fancy you mentioned that, because I'm just submitting my expenses now, and it's a little daunting. It's a lot of money that I need to get back in my bank account. But
and that's going to happen. I mean,
yeah,
I'm assuming budgets are tighter now than they were maybe a couple decades ago, or is it the same?
I feel like it's ebbed and flowed. Like, I'm going to knock on wood. The New York Times is, we're fortunate because we've avoided, or, we've had a successful digital transition so far. The music can stop any minute. So would never take anything for granted.
But the podcast you guys have is the number one news podcast, I think.
Yeah, things are going well, but this business is hard. So, any day you're always wondering when the worm might turn on you. And there's unfortunately, so many great journalists have been put out of work. It's really it's a terrible thing, I think, for the country, but certainly for journalism, which I obviously very much believe in. But anyway, so that piece, I was on the road basically from August through till like midway through October. And I was juggling the writing many drafts. It was and
are those drafts going back to the editor, who's then saying, we need to repoint in this kind of a way? Pretty
much. I mean, my process, and it's similar to my book, I do a lot of reporting. It's just the way some people can kind of get things they understand it maybe with less reporting. I like to think maybe it's a little Peter Falk, so you can call bullshit on me, but I just need to understand everything before I can write. So I bring a lot into these drafts. And so the process is more the editor helping me decide, like, do you really need to, I bring a lot in. So my process with editing is we want to really just boil this down to the essence of what is the story we're telling. So that's really what the editing is, especially at the magazine, is let's get to the nub of what you want to say. And I'm fortunate I have great editors, so I don't want to sound like Mr. Positive here, but I've been very lucky. My whole career, I've had just these great editors.
And then how about, like, is there a fact-checking department as well?
Magazine,
so what phases does your piece go through before it goes to print?
So I go and report. I do a big ugly draft where I dump everything in. Then, as I said, my editor and I will start shaving it down. And then when it's for the magazine, there are fact checkers. I had 2 full-time fact checkers for a couple of weeks, and a part-time person came in at the end because, again, there's so much reporting in it. And they're calling everybody I talk to make sure I'm quoting them accurately. It tends to be with fact checkers. They are not deferential to me. They're, if anything, a little more deferential to the sources, that their job is to be sort of neutral parties, make sure that the sources are being treated fairly. I think the people we dealt with, which, by the way, these are people who are convinced the election was stolen. They're talking to the New York Times, and I think it was, I don't want to speak for them, but I think they felt like their voice was heard and that they were treated fairly, and they had the chance to say where they thought it wasn't fair. But again, I do not want to speak for them, but I think it is a chance to show that what we do can be, we sweat about what we're putting in these pieces, certainly. And all my
over the years, have you ever been sued for a piece?
I've been sued 2 or 3 times.
Yeah,
I think
the Times obviously indemnifies you for the pieces.
Yes, and I think one suit was a big famous story we did about John McCain and fears on his staff that he was having an affair with a lobbyist. That lobbyist sued us for, I think the ask was like $50 million in a front page retraction.
Wow.
That didn't happen. There was a statement at the end, and then the lead denier of that piece from McCain came out a year or 2 ago to say the piece was true, but obviously we believed it was true or we wouldn't have printed it.
Did you have to settle the case, or what happened with
it? Wasn't really. The agreement came down to a statement that restated what was in the piece. We had never claimed we proved the affair. So the statement said we never said we proved the affair. I don't know what you call that. You could call it a settlement. I think as a rule, the paper doesn't really settle for money. But there's always things. I think every case depends. So I don't know if that's historically true, but their intention is to never settle and certainly avoid it. But I think there can be like court case, like legal fees sometimes. I think in one of the other case, there were some legal fees.
Yeah.
That were taken care of.
So what's going on with the book? I know I am in touch with you loosely over time, and I know it's a big project. You're having to shave it down from a gigantic book to just a very big book.
Yes, it's going to be a very big book. It's the book, I've been working on it for 6 years. It's covering a 50-year or 60-year fight. As in today's terms, you'd say it's about the fight to control the national news feed. So it starts out in the Nixon era with the internet is a glint in certain people's eyes at like MIT. And the Nixon White House is intent on reining in the power of the mainstream press, which is at its height of power and trust.
Basically the 3 networks.
3 networks, the Washington Post, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, the LA Times is huge then, Chicago Tribune, more newspapers. And really journalism was controlled. The national news feed was controlled by journalism. And
it feels like there were a lot more news gatherers, people like you getting on planes, going to the source of it, doing reporting on the ground that feeds up. Now it seems a little more anchor driven with a little less news gathering out there. And a lot of these newsrooms, they follow the AP and Reuters and things like that. They get their news but fewer staff on hand who are actually, doing the pavement walk with a shoe leather.
Yeah, I think that's objectively. I think we can say objectively that's true. I mean, and as I said, I started the most of my career has been spent covering media, and so when I started covering television, it was sort of the end of that era where the networks had these giant budgets. Fox again is not number one. The cable news talking head model is kind of just starting to kick off. I mean, CNN existed since 1980, and they didn't do as many of the big deep packages that broadcast news did. ABC, CBS, NBC News when I was growing up, when you were growing up, these they did a lot of reported packages, like little stories, or not little, like 5-minute segments. The talking head thing starts picking up in the early 2000s, or maybe it's really mid-90s when MSNBC and Fox come online, join CNN, and the news networks were suffering, and they start dropping bureaus. They have more international bureaus. They have bigger international staff, so they start kind of everything starts paring down when it comes to reporting.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I remember the sort of rise of Fox News, and you covered a lot of that because you were doing a lot of the media reporting for the Times through that decade of 2000 to 2010, and it was the slow decline of the big three networks, and the rapid rise, certainly as a percentage of cable news. And you fast forward really just like 15 years to today, and it's now the slow, not so slow decline of cable news and the rapid rise of digital news media.
Yes. And
I mean, Fox feels so tired to me now. You look at it these days, it's and CNN and MSNBC, all three of them just seem to be struggling, and you can feel their contraction. Just on the screen, you can almost feel their contraction, and the number of people getting news from other venues is really surging in just the last few years.
Well, especially right now, you have a dynamic where I think Fox is doing quite well in the aftermath of the election in their universe, right? And CNN and MSNBC are really crashing. But we've seen that before in that cable universe, which now, where's that stand? I think we're still in the process of figuring out, like, where does X come in? You have Joe Rogan's podcast, you have Sirius, you have Megyn's show, Megyn Kelly, perhaps some have heard of her. So it's on fire, right? So you have all these big other sources. And my book, when it starts out, it's people in the Nixon world saying, God, we need other voices because we can't get around this monolithic journalistic establishment, which, by the way, was covering things that weren't convenient for Nixon, like high crimes and misdemeanors. But there was some. But I think even liberal press types agreed that it was not a healthy dynamic to have three networks and some big newspapers. And there was definitely a view, I think, across the political divide, which wasn't as deep as it is now, that you need more voices, you need more sources.
Was radio more conservative even back in the Nixon days? I mean, this is Rush Limbaugh probably came online somewhere in the early 90s, I guess.
Yeah, 80s.
I'm not even sure. Late 80s.
Right. Mid 80s. He's a big part of the book.
Oh, is that right?
The book's what's not. Like, when people ask me what's the book about, I'm like, what isn't it about?
Yeah.
Which my editors and agent hate that joke. But
you were just telling me you've already cut 75,000 words down. You need to cut another 75,000 words.
I need to cut a lot more. Yeah, and there's, it's been a busy
So
year.
Was radio conservative even in the 60s, 70s, or that
Not
sort of
really, because you had the fairness doctrine in place. And the fairness doctrine meant that it was under the old broadcast rules. Some of it still exists. Where when radio was brand new, the federal government needed to manage it. And they needed to manage it on the one hand because everyone wanted to make their own radio station. Because when radio's brand new, you can, as you remember, I don't know if you were a kid, when I was a kid, you could do your own radio, like with a Radio Shack kit, right? So the federal government needed to sort out the signals so that people weren't like stepping all over each other. So to make it a real industry. But they decided, if you're going to have this kind of instant megaphone to millions of people that also has a lot of power over democracy, and we're going to create a new licensing system where you have to get your license from us, and we're going to ask you to follow the public good. And the public good was, in part, that you cover all sides of all issues, that one candidate doesn't get more than any other. And this is especially non-news. I mean, news programming is a little different because if a story is about someone, it's about someone. You don't have to give it a same. But generally, they try to strike some balance. Weird system, antithetical in some ways to today's way of thinking. But it meant you couldn't have a Rush Limbaugh, because if you had a Rush Limbaugh for 3 hours bashing the Democrats, the radio stations could be forced but someone would have to make a complaint to the government, and the government, if they agree, would say, okay, now you have to give 3 hours to the other side. So it wasn't economically feasible to allow a Rush.
And who is judge, jury, and arbiter of that? There are some people who are, Rush is a conservative guy, and he would self-identify as such, but there are those who are not really honest about that.
Well, there was an incredibly complicated, and this is all lost history, which is my favorite part of this book, is look, there was a complicated system where the radio stations have to keep very thorough logs. Believe it or not, like until fairly recently, they keep these logs. They had to meet with community members and make sure that, with all sides, make sure that they're, again, it's a different time, right? I don't think it was as hard then, maybe, to get people get your local Republicans, get your local Democrats, hear them out. What complaints do you have? And they had to account for all of this. It was this crazy system, and it had many flaws. It withstood Supreme Court scrutiny again and again and again. So that was within the First Amendment. At the end, when the country's already moving away from it, the courts start to change, but it doesn't get tested really because it's going away. The Reagan administration does away with it. But that said, so to answer your question, you had like Paul Harvey, but it just wasn't, nothing existed until Rush in any real way.
Yeah. And now, it is more fragmented than ever. I mean, you can hop online, and there are a number. YouTube is just exploding. I think I read something recently. YouTube is now the biggest media company. More people are getting their news from YouTube than almost anywhere else, I think, at this point. It just crossed over in the last year or so.
Exploding. But the question now that we're grappling with is are they getting their news from YouTube, or are they getting information from YouTube, which is different, right? And I think that's what, as a country, we're sort of, I don't know if it's the tail that wags the dog.
I don't think news, as you're defining it, is anywhere anymore. I don't think that it even exists.
Well,
I mean, is Morning Joe news?
That's opinion.
That's all opinion.
Right. I think they would say their opinion.
And fluctuating. I mean, it's like, I don't know. That show did not have a good 4 years, I would say. And just in terms of like saying one thing and the next day, the opposite.
Since I'm no longer the media columnist for the New York Times, I cannot opine, but I can state categorically that they've obviously gone through a great sort of challenge over the last couple of weeks when I'm sure your listeners, I assume your listeners.
Or even months, like the best Biden ever. And then George Clooney meets him for 5 minutes and is compelled to write an op-ed like, oh my God, he cannot run, but that was the best Biden ever. And Joe Scarborough has far more access to Biden than Clooney's 5 minutes.
Yes. We did write a piece I wrote a piece with my colleague Michael Grimbaum about MSNBC in the spring. I want to go back and reread it, but it was about this issue because MSNBC still is, may not be for long, attached to NBC News, which is a straight news operation, which, does do news. They do news. It's reported. It's verified. It's not, the evening news or the nightly news, with Lester Holt. It's not, people aren't sitting there spouting off opinions. Yeah. And they really had problems sometimes with MSNBC, which embraced its a more of a left-wing, almost DNC sensibility, as we wrote. And that was causing great tension between NBC News and MSNBC because people weren't distinguishing.
Do you think even though the news, for example, the debate moderators at ABC, and we'll get off politics here in a little bit because we usually don't do a lot of that, but because you
it's fine to cover it,
media, exactly. So
makes sense, sure.
The debate moderators, ABC or CBS, for example, they're straight news people, but there is bias that can manifest in ways that are not just telling lies or telling nonsense. It's in story selection or a way a question is asked or how many questions are asked this way versus that way. They're pressing questions, but if one is sort of like tell us how great you are, and the other is like sort of going, drilling down into the, reopening scabs kind of thing. Just as a broad question, what did you think of the debate moderators?
I'm going to tell you that I am so worn out from this campaign that I have to rattle my brain to remember that long ago.
Well, the ABC had David Muir and some, I don't remember all the names. I'm not that, and then Norah O'Donnell did it for CBS.
I thought that, and there was this big CNN debate, right? Well, first of all.
Right. Was that Tapper? Who did it for CNN? I can't remember. Okay, whatever.
I should know this. I'm just I don't remember what I had for breakfast yesterday. But I would say my takeaway was, first of all, the debate where Biden basically falls
that was the CNN
apart.
one, I think. Yeah.
That's an amazing debate. Like that was an important, consequential debate.
Yeah. But and ABC, CBS, those were good.
I'd have to. I was not covering the debates this time in the classic sense, so I don't know. I don't remember feeling like they were each some were better than others, right? I think there were who was fact checking more, who was not fact checking. Was the fact checking done in a sloppy way? Was it or a way that people found offensive? It's important to fact check, I believe, but it's a tricky business. Mm-hmm. The beauty of print is we're not doing live television.
Yeah.
Right. And that's why when my stories, and we're talking about live fact checkers, and we're just making sure that we're locked down on things. That's why I don't love doing TV myself, because I'm really, and even in an interview like this, when I'm right, I put
there can be too many mistakes in a live. Yeah.
Well, even now, right? Like before anything that I put in words in my newspaper or my book, I spend, sometimes all-nighters. Is this accurate? Is this fair? Can I support this? So I would never be. I'd be a terrible debate moderator, right?
Well, I mean,
and a worse pundit.
The other take on that, though, is you really shouldn't interfere too much. I think you make the case that the other candidate should be the fact checker. If someone's going to spew lies, that person should, be given time to dispute that.
I guess, but. Yes.
I mean, how many times has the moderator stepped in to fact check and been wrong? And
that has
swayed the entire
that
nation?
Is true.
And there's Candy Crowley's the famous example.
That is true.
There were elements of that happening even this cycle in those ABC and CBS debates where they kind of overstepped a little bit, and they are viewed by the nation as the sort of final arbiter of fact. And if they don't do it, you really got to cut it cleanly.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, you've really fouled the process.
No question. But again, as someone who does literally pull all-nighters to make sure what's in my stories is accurate, I don't, on the flip side of that, love, you've got the biggest television audience of the year often. Mm-hmm. I don't love the idea that if one candidate is presenting a completely false version of reality, and look, I'm one of those people, like, I was a bartender, right? Mm-hmm. Or a floor guy, whatever you want to call me. My friends are living the real world, and they don't have time to go fact check things. And so when they hear something on TV, like, okay, well, maybe, I don't know, but it's a major issue you're voting on. This is again the challenge of the format, and why I prefer print. I'm not claiming superiority. That's why I personally prefer print. Is don't you want people to make their voting decisions on the truth?
Yeah.
I'm asking you, do you?
Absolutely. And there's a higher burden on voters.
I guess it's naive.
There's a higher burden on voters to sort through it now.
But they don't have time. My friends don't. My friends in my real life do not have time.
The idea that there's one place to go is fantasy land.
Right. But now you can go to many sources that don't pull all-nighters trying to figure out if it's right. Right. And that's like a fundamental change. And this is what the book is capturing, is the journey here, but that's a fundamental change in society. Right now, the 3-network model was obviously nobody wanted that. Mm-hmm. That was not a healthy thing. This is what we have now.
The format that I like the best is where you have a good host, generally a lawyer,
right,
who brings on someone smart from the right, someone smart from the left, and then boom, the issue is presented, and then you get a 360 view.
It sounds like someone's show.
Who does it that way? Yeah,
yeah.
And I prefer that. I know News Nation is trying to do kind of news, I guess with I can't remember their tagline. It's like with an edge or an opinion, but like we're trying to do it from the center. But even still, no one person does it. There is no anchor who's from the center. I just don't believe that, because maybe on a certain issue they might be, but not across the issue. So you really need to find someone on opposite sides of every issue and have them on and just have a mini, 10-minute, 15-minute debate on whatever it is.
But but you asked a little bit ago, what happened, because we used to have reported pieces on the news and now we have talking heads. So part of this is the talking head model is people are just spewing what's true, and a host, which again, like these are bygone days. So, all you can do is this era is over, right? What are you going to do? But it's what
the talking head can have a guest come on and they can have a back and forth, a robust back and forth. And there are still news gatherers out there. I just think that less money is being thrown at the number of people out there on the street gathering the news, and more is on the person back in the studio.
Yes, but what I was gonna say though is I think where Fox, especially is when Fox comes on the scene, what it's initially really doing, it's saying, and I kind of believe this when I think about especially like big television journalism, is with Fox in the mix. Let's say there's a window, right, of like a balanced, I don't want to say fair and balanced, a window of like journalistic balance. Mm-hmm. And so you look at the 6:30 show first under Bret Hume, now under,
Bret Baier.
It was sort of like the same thing as the 6:30 evening news on ABC, but it picked some different angles because it was coming from the center right. Mm-hmm. And, let's say CBS was coming from the center left. But it's I always hate giving those distinctions, right? Because some stories are neither left nor right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What's happening in the world. But when it comes to those stories you're talking about where your bias kind of is displayed, I think it was a healthy thing to have in this window something like 6:30 on Fox, where they're selecting a different set of stories, but they're based in verified reported fact. I like verified reported fact. Mm-hmm. And so you had ABC doing a different realm, but that was good. It was needed, mm-hmm. right? Because again, if you go and watch, which I've spent a lot of time, if you watch stuff, it starts correcting itself, but there's a point in like the early 80s where the three networks, it's like, wow, you wouldn't see it today. It's there's definitely a harder, believe it or not, a harder lean to the left.
The three networks today versus
back then.
In the 80s, it leaned
back then, left. Before Fox comes along, you can really feel it even a little more.
That's interesting. I didn't pay, I was a little kid in the 80s, so I didn't notice it. And the idea of like media bias wasn't really talked about back in the 80s. So I wonder, some Republican on Capitol Hill must have known and
read the book.
Seen it, but okay, great.
If it ever gets done, read the book.
So where does this all land in say 5 and 10 years in terms of digital coming up, cable and the networks are down? By the way, I don't know. I know Norah O'Donnell is now leaving the anchor chair at CBS Evening News, but I never her name just never entered my consciousness. None of the three network news. I didn't even know Lester Holt was still doing it. I wasn't sure if he had been replaced yet or not, but. They're so irrelevant now compared to especially to the 80s. I mean, that was it in the 80s.
I get well, yes and no, right? Because the one thing I'm always careful about, and I think we'll get to this in the lightning round, so I'm going to save some of that. But I don't, I've been writing the network news is over since I started at covering TV, which is now 25 years ago. David Muir, that ABC show, 6:30 show, World News Tonight, is often one of the top rated shows with like many millions of people, like 2 or 3 times the size of Fox's national audience. Mm-hmm. And Fox has got a fairly big audience. And also the thing you can't do is there's viewership online and there's Nielsen analyzed ratings, and they're different because the network, the whatever 6 or 7 million that might watch ABC News at 6:30, and not fact check me, please. I think it's around 6 or 7. That's an average audience. So it means it's millions of more. Because it's averaged over the course of a half hour.
It's not the same person every 15 minutes. Yeah, so it's 6 million in the first 15 minutes, but that could be shuffled out to a totally different group of people in the second 15 minutes of the show.
So it's not as impactful, I guess, right? Like the news you follow, the news I follow.
But what was Peter Jennings getting in the 80s? I mean, his numbers were
quite a bit more. I mean,
like 20 million probably.
It was up there. I mean, it's quite a bit more, but when it starts crashing, it levels off at a certain level where, so if it's between them, it's like between 15 and 20 million people a night. It's still a lot of people to watch. I mean, it's more than anything on cable, right? I think Bret beats some, it depends on the market. Like I think in markets, and I haven't checked this in a long time, but last time I checked, Bret at 6:30 was beating the network news in certain markets, but nationally, they're still surprisingly big. Are they influential? It depends. When they break a story, they're influential. Night to night, they're not in the mix in the conversation the way you and I are talking about, right? You hear more, but it's so ephemeral, right? Like, but in my world, in your world, you hear more sometimes about what happened with Megyn Kelly or what happened with Bill Maher or what, you know, a bit more times. But I'm just saying there's still many millions of people who watch those shows. And I want to say one thing I thought was very interesting, and it's like one of the stories I didn't get to do this last campaign that I really wanted to do was both. When I told you I did a story about MSNBC and NBC News and the tensions between them. And one thing that came out in that story that I really wanted to explore more is that both the then Biden campaign, when I was doing that story, Biden before Harris, and Trump campaigns were all over those network newscasts at 6:30. They really cared about what they were saying every night, which told you that those television stations in these little markets all over the country, they have incredible reach, were important to the campaigns. I think they were important to the campaigns, but again, I didn't get to explore it. I wish I could have. I just didn't. It's just, you know, there's only so many days in the year. I think that they must have decided that there were people watching those 6:30 newscasts who are persuadable. So they mattered. They definitely mattered. And those networks at times were under incredible pressure from both campaigns. You're not being fair to us, or why are you doing that, or why are you doing this? Yeah. And if those shows did not matter, they would not be under pressure from these campaigns. So that's my note of caution. Not anything like what they were at the beginning of my book. Because the beginning of my book, the Nixon White House is obsessed with one person, Walter Cronkite. It is Cronkite. They're just like always cursing his name. They just can't get around Walter Cronkite. Think about that.
And so is one of the reveals of the book that Cronkite actually was left sort of behind the scenes, or he was center?
I don't think so. I really don't. I mean, again, I don't do a big I'm more interested at that point of the book about what people are doing about him. But it was, I don't think Watergate was not a left-right issue. Maybe today it would be, but then it certainly wasn't. I mean, the people who came to tell Nixon he had to resign were Republicans. So, and these were, you know, alleged crimes. So, but it wasn't always. I'll tell you what for instance, what really drove Nixon personally crazy, and this Nixon certainly saw as a left thing, is that he thought that the networks gave way too much attention to the Vietnam War protests. Drove him nuts. But no president had to deal with that quite in the same way. But I will also tell you that the first president who really was cursing Cronkite was Johnson. So, Democrat, right? Johnson hated, and he says to the newscasters back in that day when he's leaving office, "You guys are what changed everything. You guys are like, we used to work it. But by the way, is this a good thing or a bad thing? We used to be able to work things out in our back room, and you frickin' guys weren't here, and now we have your guys' cameras in our faces, and so, you know."
That seems like a good thing. I mean, the media and politics should be adversarial. And back to your MTA experience with the subway reporting, maybe not that adversarial,
right,
but
depending,
it should be adversarial.
Fair, but
adversarial.
And to me, most important of all, and it's accurate. And that again brings me to, in today's era, are people just throwing a lot of stuff out there, and it might not be accurate, and it might be shaping minds. And that's life. That's the world we're in now. But I was just raised in this. If you were putting something, and I have friends who put things on Instagram, you know, I was just raised, before you're putting this out in the world, you better make sure you're right. And by the way, you can stay up all night, every night, and still get it wrong. It's hard to get things right. It takes a lot of work. Yeah. And we're human.
And as a news consumer, it does now take more work than it used to. And when I'm on Twitter, X, whatever, I follow multiple people. There are people I trust on both sides, and I follow both. And you can, you know, it does take a couple extra steps, but you can. Well, there's an interesting thing. Kind of suss out what is nonsense by doing it that way, I think.
You can, but there's an interesting thing on Twitter now and all of the platforms, is that they're treated at times as if they're these open fora. I think now I'm allowed to say forum. There are these open fora.
Is it the plural of forum is fora?
It used to be. I think now, like, our style guide doesn't care anymore. So I think, but again, fact accuracy, I will go and fact check this after.
Yeah, please.
But they're not. They're not. They're based on algorithms that are, and so Elon Musk is openly saying right now, like, I'm not giving equal weight. It's not an equal thing, right?
But I follow who I want to follow. So if I can follow anyone on the left that I want and anyone on the right that I want, and I'll get their stuff.
Not necessarily in the order, it's like you're still getting a feed that the machine
but I
is
can
telling
go
you.
to them too if I want to, or I can research what they've said on an issue.
Right. You have to go. You have to drill down a bit more, right? And most people don't, and they don't have time. Again, like my friends are busy. They don't read me, which is fine, but they're busy, and that's why there's a lot of talk about this. And I think what I like about doing this book is that I get to go into depth and really like show how we got here. Mm-hmm. It's capturing this moment right now. It's a little bit like the fish describing the water. I think we don't quite, we're not quite, it's new, mm-hmm. right? And I don't think we've quite have our arms.
So you think the three broadcast networks continue to slowly shrink, but they're going to be around for a while, I guess. They're still big numbers. Cable, the three main cable nets, Fox, CNN, and MS. MS will probably exist outside of NBC News.
Looks that way.
And they survived. CNN, actually, in the immediate aftermath of, if we say MS and CNN are left, in losing the White House to the right, there's a period of tune-out. But it's not so bad to be in the opposition, covering, they'll be covering the White House, the Trump administration, and people might tune in for that after a little while.
Well, yeah, maybe. I mean, first, right, for MS, certainly, I've been around long enough to watch Fox fall off a cliff when their audience is upset about the outcome of an election.
And then they come back.
And they do come back. I mean, and even now, like, again, they're like having a good ratings run right now. And if you look at a few years ago, they lost a lot of audience, especially back to our aforementioned January 6th post period.
Mm-hmm. People didn't want to see it. They weren't tuning in.
People weren't, and then they came back.
Yeah.
So we'll see. But I'm not saying at some point maybe they don't come back. So maybe MSNBC does.
Well, there's also
recover.
just the systemic cord cutting and people going to YouTube. YouTube, you can pull YouTube up on your TV like any other channel. So all of these shows that are available there are now in the living rooms.
Right. So I don't feel comfortable being predictive. I guess my experience, but I'm burned by the experience of seeing, okay, well, that's going to be it for them. And then it never is. Or like just writing like these networks are dinosaurs, which indeed they are, but yet, and the Nielsen's they're shrinking all the time.
Well, their overall number is probably huge, but the demo, how's that number? Under 45?
Not great. No, it's always, they've always had
tiny
kind of
there, right?
Well, look at the commercials. They tell you everything.
Yeah, right.
Cialis is like,
I was just going to say Cialis.
It's probably aging out of Cialis because at some point, I don't know. I mean, hopefully not. I don't know. Now we're getting into really uncomfortable territory, but, I don't know.
All right. Well, one last prediction. When will this book be out? Do you know? Late 25?
Yeah,
maybe.
Hopefully. I'm gonna get in trouble with my publisher because we haven't even really discussed it. But that would be the hope. Maybe, who knows? I mean, it's what month are we in? I know. Is it December now?
Yeah.
Yeah, but hopefully not long after that.
Okay.
For sure. So
right.
I hope people will still care.
Well, I might have to see. I'll read the first draft of the many thousands of pages.
I don't think you have the time.
Right.
Talk about people. You're too busy.
I'll read the trimmed version then.
Yes.
Do you have a title?
It's changed. So no, it's it's no longer. No.
Okay.
Yeah.
And this will be your first book. More than 2,000 articles, but this will be book number 1.
Yeah, which is the book, which is like 5 books in one.
Yeah.
So I'm going to say it's my first 5 books.
Your first 5 books.
Maybe 10, depending on length.
Well, congrats on that. I'm excited to read because I know,
Don't congratulate. Knock on wood. No congratulations till it's done.
Well,
if you don't mind.
I can vouch for you to the audience that it has been a multi-year.
Yes.
We've had a number of lunches and drinks over the years where this book has been a topic.
It's been years.
And
it gets, when the campaign gets hot, obviously, like you can't really.
You have to extract yourself completely.
You just can't.
And then pick up the thread.
Yeah, that's the problem. And now you have a change in administration. So it's busy.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I'm excited for it. All right, so on to the lightning round with Jim Rutenberg.
All right, bring it.
Your favorite book as a kid?
I think I'd have to say Dune.
Dune. Wow.
I'd have to say Dune.
So you're happy about the movies? Did they do justice?
Nothing's gonna capture the magic of that book when you're like a tween. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that book's incredible. I would read it to Chameleons UK's first album, just like album and book, perfect pairing.
All right.
Yeah.
Book or books you're reading now?
I'm reading The Curious Incident of the dog in the nighttime, right?
I don't know.
There's a play. Great. I'll lend it to you. I recently finished Tomorrow, and Tomorrow, about like a gaming world book. Very cool. Very well done. And The Sunset Years of Agnes Sharp, which is just delightful. Just delightful. And I'm constantly reading nonfiction. So I'm restarting The Power Broker.
Okay, nice.
Which I've read.
Yeah, which just had an anniversary, right?
Had an anniversary. Robert Caro.
Yeah.
Very big. Talk about a big book.
That's a doorstop for sure.
Yeah, but every word is worth it. So I'm rereading. I've read that before in its entirety. I've used it as reference, but starting again. But it's almost like Caro's just so good. It's a little depressing, but as an author, but it's fantastic, obviously.
How do you get your book recommendations? You walk around the time, you got the New York Times book review right there. Do you have a sort of trusted source in the paper that?
Really, the two people who I get my fiction recommendations from are my sister and my wife. They're both giant readers. And then nonfiction, I mean, there's certain, like The Power Broker is just one of those books as a journalist since I started.
Yeah.
It's the first time I read it was as a young reporter in New York City. So that's kind of an obvious one. And then, then the book review, sure. I read the book review every week. And there's always a million things in it that I want to get to read. It's hard to read. I mean, this year's been hard. It's been hard. Very hard to get a lot of reading.
You do a ton of reading and research for your own writing. It's hard to sort of grab an outside book.
I mean, my house is filled with books for research right now. You know, one of the coolest things is going to Amazon and finding all these great out-of-print books. They're just filled. There's so much great information in the world just in these old books. Incredible.
Yeah, so same. I'm doing some research now as well, and I either go to the Abe books or there's Biblio. You can find, and Amazon has old ones as well. Because it'll be some obscure book that I need, and 30 years ago it'd be impossible to find it. So you'd have to get lucky in a library or something. But you can basically hop online and find almost any book.
Yes, it's incredible. Yeah, incredible. Sometimes you don't even have to buy them. They're sort of like
they're
online.
Yeah, they're
just digitally.
You can just pull down something. But.
And I also want to plug the New York Public Library, because if you are a member of the New York Public Library, you can get a lot of ebooks on loan, and that goes deep.
Yeah.
Yeah, surprising. Huge. It's a really deep store of books that you can
And they do actually throttle that. If someone has the ebook, you have to wait until it's sort of that time is up, and which is good for the writer, so that Yeah,
great for I feel like the books that I'm pulling for my book, it's like somebody in that New York Public Library it's like, oh my God, they're excited. Like someone's actually poor ebook that has never been since it's come into ebook status has never been checked out. Yeah.
That's funny. Yeah. All right.
I'm slowing down your lightning rod.
No, that's all right. Sorry. Sometimes the lightning tangent is good. The piece you've written in your career that generated the most buzz?
That's a hard question. I will say the piece this year that generated the most buzz was Rupert. We broke the story of Rupert Murdoch's impending nuptials, his fifth marriage. That was like internationally huge news break. And then I'd say,
how did you come across the news?
I cannot tell you. And
then, the unnamed source.
And then,
can you tell me if it's the same source going back years?
I guess I can't really tell you.
It can tell me nothing.
Sorry,
right?
I can't.
Hey, I respect your discipline.
And then, secondarily, was a Murdoch story was about the family trust fight, which we broke the news about.
Yeah, people are obsessed with Murdoch stories. We can know this from the success of the show Succession, which is this sort of thin veil over them, but people want to know more.
Yeah, and in the real world, it actually has more bearing on our lives because, again, I would say Fox is still holds an important place in the political media, national cultural firmament, and so that family controls that. And so it has and news properties across English speaking world. So it's not just a family drama. That's why I love that story. It's not just a family drama, and it's very human, right? We can all relate to the human elements of a family drama, but it really matters what happens in that family.
Yeah.
For now. To your point, for now, we'll see what happens with the changing media sphere, but right now it really matters.
Do you think are they as big now as they were in, say, 2016, 2020?
I don't know, because a lot of people wanted to say they aren't, but then the new administration is hiring from their network. So it's a little hard to say, oh, they don't matter anymore. But wait a minute, they hired another one at a Fox. So I don't think you could say that. And I wonder what the campaign would have looked like if there weren't a Fox News or anything like it. I don't know what that would have looked like.
I just think there's more. I remember Fox at one point when Newsmax first came up, they were sort of worried about their right flank. Like, oh my gosh, we need to go farther right. I just don't get the sense Fox is shaping the conversation for the right half of the country in the way that they did 8 years ago. I could be wrong.
I don't think they're mutually exclusive. Like, that could totally be right. And obviously, to your point, like, they're big new players. But again, not being what it was doesn't mean nothing now. Right, you know what I mean? Big. It's still super important. And I think a lot of people would kill to have what they have, especially in right-wing media, right?
Yeah.
So,
and it's still dwarfing MS and CNN by multiples.
So I don't, and their audience is still, it's bigger than it was when I started covering Fox on average audience size.
The Morning Joe audience has never been smaller, it seems like. Will that show survive a spin-out?
I don't know. I mean, again, I would say experience has taught me that to expect that show to rebound, but you and I are talking about cord cutting and a new world, so I don't know. I'm ready for anything as someone who has to cover that, but to some degree. But I don't know. I've just, again, seen, let's talk about it after, like, a few weeks after inauguration, when, people we're going to.
Do you think the trip that they made to Mar-a-Lago helped or hurt? Because it's like they have their base who doesn't want that, but their base is now so small that they need to find others. They're courting others, but then they lose the remainder of their small base. It's like,
I mean, on paper,
no win.
On like objective balance sheet, it was a loss, right? It's like their audience went down after that. So on the ledger, you can objectively say that was a net negative. Again, I don't. And who are they are people who are Trump fans going to start watching Morning Joe because of it? Of course not.
Who they conceivably be courting to come over?
I guess I can only quote their words were, we just felt like if we had an obligation to do that now that he's won this election. So they're not terming it in terms of courting people per se. I think there's probably, again, speculation, I'm going to flag that, some corporate pressure to try to broaden things out. But I don't know. And we're going into the holidays. It's this post-election period. It's a funny thing that happens after an election that's this hard fought, and then suddenly, like, whoosh, we're not used to that because, like, the last one went on for weeks, right? We were all, like, ready for that. So it's sort of like when the adrenaline is taken out of a story, the whole country's kind of like, okay, that election's up. Yeah. So let's wait till, I can't judge that till the new administration is governing. We see what the reactions are. And does MSNBC recover? Maybe it doesn't. Historically, that network in that position has. And then what can CNN do? Because let's not forget, they're having a really hard time.
Yeah.
So
is CNN still doing the daytime is news and primetime is opinion, or where and MS too? Like, where are they sort of drawing the line?
I have to say, again, as someone who was not covering it that way this year, but whenever I was watching, there were a lot of panels at night that were both, were balanced. There was a lot of shouting, right? But there were balanced panels, and maybe, you can talk about the moderating of those panels separately, but they had a Trump surrogates on with Biden, then Harris surrogates. They hashed it out all night. And I just don't know if that's going to attract an audience at all now going forward. Like, that, to me, if there's anything I'm really wondering about, is that, like, is MSNBC better positioned for a rebound than CNN? Because MSNBC does offer itself up as sort of like the resistance on television.
Yeah.
And certainly a lot of the day parts. And CNN doesn't. And again, we can all debate whether we think it does or not, but they were presenting these debates between both sides of this last election, and I don't know that's what people want at all anymore. But we'll see. Again, we'll see.
Yeah, everyone's sort of finger in the air on that. News Nation is another example of
Yeah, you've had Dan.
It sounds great, but will people come watch?
Right. Isn't there another lightning round? I thought there was one more.
This is a long lightning round. Yeah,
I'm
we've got more to go.
killing it for you.
All right, here we go. This will be a quick and easy one. The news anchor of choice in the Rutenberg home when you were a kid.
Jim Gardner, Channel 6 News, Action News.
Jim Gardner. Oh, that was your local news. How about
your local news too, right?
Well, I don't.
Aren't you from
we
Philly?
Were like, yeah, but I mean like the 6:30 national. Who was your?
Oh, well, because we were on because we had Jim Gardner from Channel 6 Action News. Song is still in my head. Bump.
Yeah,
bump,
Jim Gardner.
Bump,
That's right. Mustache, sort of gray, black hair. That guy.
Yeah, and then they had a song.
Yes. Oh my God,
something in the world with me. Yeah. Take a little bit of time. Philly.
Yeah. Were you in Philly?
My dad was downtown and my mom was in a town called Narberth. Yeah. But then because
Jim Gardner,
Jim Gardner,
wow,
Channel
6.
I think he was the number one. If he wasn't the number one, he was top in the country up there. ABC News, ABC affiliate.
So then did you stay on with
Then
Jennings?
you just stay on and it would be Jennings.
So, yeah, because we were at Peter Jennings' house.
I would watch that.
Yeah, you're Jim
like
Gardner
crazy.
and Peter Jennings.
Yeah, Jim Gardner. Do you remember those songs? Because how many? You remember that? Yeah.
Yeah.
And then there was one with words at the end. It was,
oh my God! It's got to be findable on YouTube. I'm gonna have to go look that up later.
It's a beautiful song.
Yeah, that'll bring back all the memories.
Yeah, I don't know if they'll all be good.
No.
But shout out to Philly, great town, go Flyers,
and
go Eagles.
Yeah, the Eagles are looking good.
And don't say it.
You know who's an Eagles fan is Tapper.
He is.
He's a big Phillies.
He's very performative about it. Yeah, as he should be. Yeah. But I'm superstitious, as you are, right? Like, okay, I don't know.
Well, we completely shat the bed last year. I mean, that was the Eagles did.
Yeah,
and how many? Great, and
that's our lot as Philadelphia fans. I just even though 10-2, okay, that's great. But I don't know.
We're gluttons for disappointment.
Yeah, and you could tell it in the sports press. Like they're still not like they're not getting the credit that they might deserve with that record. But I think that's because everyone's like, I don't want to like go out on a limb for these guys again.
Yeah. So. Yeah. Well, we'll see. We're getting there. I love Saquon. He's been amazing. Fun to watch.
Amazing. But again, knock on wood.
Yeah. Wow, that was a hard
You got to make it count.
I heard that.
You got to make it count. If it's not, and by the way, for the listeners, that was on my head.
Yeah, that was a hard.
If you're not doing real wood, you got to make it count. Yeah.
All right,
it's got to be
question.
3 times.
Now, this will be tough to drag out of you because as an avid surfer, you may be loath to give it up. But the best surf break on the East Coast.
The best on the East Coast? I would never say my break. You wouldn't want to go there anyways. Nothing but sharks. Nothing but sharks. I don't know. I mean, the east end of Long Island obviously is where I surf, and I love it there. I haven't surfed the Outer Banks.
Are you doing winter surfing? I mean, it is cold out
of course.
So have you been out recently?
Is that like last weekend or the weekend before? The weekend before.
The cold weather surfing I cannot do.
We're not even there yet. It's just getting started.
Oh.
Yeah, but fewer people.
Yeah.
Fewer people. But I will give a shout out to the Asbury Park area. Again, I won't name breaks. Been enjoying that a bit last summer. Obviously, we've got the Rockaways here in Queens. Mm-hmm. You and I still need to go there. You go Manasquan, right?
Yeah, there are different areas in New Jersey where I've gone.
You're not. Okay.
But not that much in the last few years. I'm nursing a couple injuries, so I haven't done a lot of surfing lately.
Yeah, but you're a young guy.
I'll rebound. I've got a few years left.
Yeah, we're both young guys.
Yeah. All right, last question for Jim Rutenberg. One piece of advice for the audience.
Oh, okay. This is what I was holding back. My piece of advice is, for what it's worth, from just a guy from Philadelphia, but my piece of advice is to avoid, there are a lot of big declarations now that, the election's over and this means that and that means that and this is going to be the end of this and let's just wait and see. Mm-hmm. It's hard to do, right? From my viewpoint, I'm just going to report. I don't like predictive journalism much anyway. But I think everyone's got to watch these big proclamations. Could be right, may not be right. So what's, I don't know what value it has. Mm-hmm. Is it the end of this? Is it the beginning of that? We're definitely at a time of incredible change, but change is hard to predict, and I don't know where it all ends up. So it's
so don't be hysterical. Take a breath.
Don't be anything or overly. If you're a Trump fan and you expect all these things are gonna look, we don't know. Let's see how it goes, right? Mm-hmm. I don't know what's the Senate gonna look like. What's gonna happen. We'll see. For Trump voters, they have all the reason. They have a broader coalition this time, so maybe things will work out in a way that they'll be happy with. For resistance types, maybe it won't work out the way that Trump. So it's like, let's wait. I think that the last time around, when Trump won in 2016, it was a real shock to the system, and there was a lot of instant reaction. And I think 8 years later, he's still a political figure like none we've ever seen in our lifetimes, but we just don't know how the system's going to deal with it, how he's going to really govern. So that's my thing.
All right, that's
day by day.
Yeah.
Another song I could go launch into. Not as good as the Action News closing credits.
I'm going straight to YouTube after this. I've got to
check
find
it out.
It's like I've almost got it in my head.
I wonder if it's got fair use where you can make it your kind of bump out for this.
You know what? It
might be old enough.
Happily have that.
Yeah, the copyright might be lapsed.
Jim, thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks.